Now for our roundtable with our News Channel 5 political analyst, Mary Anna Mancuso and Brian Crowley. And you heard the issues and the controversies. Take your pick, Brian, your assessment.
Well, let me start with the whole idea of the voting reform. It's interesting that in the 2020 election, Governor DeSantis said the election went perfectly and that we were a model for the nation. Well, apparently we're not, because it required all these fixes. Well, they aren't fixing anything. They're making it harder to vote. And, for my 90-year-old mother, for her to have to go through getting a new mail-in ballot every year, making it harder to find a drop box, requiring election supervisors to hire staff to stand in front of drop boxes. I mean, a lot of it is silly. I would have been more impressed if the Florida Legislature looked at ways at really modernizing voting. Maybe they should have explored the idea of online voting.
Mary Anna?
To Brian's point, yes, the Republicans in Florida have decided that they're going to break the election system and make it more difficult for Floridians to vote, which is problematic, especially since they're taking aim when it comes to vote by mail, which they have notoriously won elections through mail-in ballots. So if they're saying that it's fraudulent, does this mean that they committed fraud in the previous elections where they won by vote by mail?
Use of force legislation, waiting on governor's signature there, anti-riot bill that's becoming law, transgender athletes bill, a lot of hot button issues, as we said at the outset. You heard the Republican and Democratic perspective. Mary Anna, thoughts?
This is just a re-election agenda for Governor DeSantis, and we see that the legislature is willing to help him in the momentum that he needs to go to re-election in 2022 and potentially soft launch a bid for president in 2024.
Brian, what stands out among the other issues you heard them talking about and your thoughts?
Well, frankly, a lot of the issues that they're talking about don't stand out at all. This has been a very petty, small ball legislature. They're not looking at big ways of improving Florida over the next 20, 30 years. There were times, and this is not unique to this legislature, but there were times when the legislature would be more forward thinking, when they'd be looking at big picture ideas, how to make dramatic improvements to the state. This was just small ball pettiness and frankly, a waste of taxpayer dollars.
Toby Overdorf talked about renewable energy fixes to try and boost that, talked about legislation that will try to continue to cut down on human trafficking. A few weeks ago, I was talking to Democratic state lawmakers, said we're not talking enough about health care and other items. Mary Anna, to Brian's point, on issues that will have long-term reverberations, although those impacted by the ones that were discussed say those will have long-term impact. Your thoughts about that as we move forward?
Unfortunately, some of the bills that were passed in this legislative session will have a long-term impact, and not in the best way. We'll see some of them, such as the anti-riot bill, possibly slogged down in legal issues for years to come. The problem with the legislature this semester or this session has been that they've been focusing merely on how can they go back to their base, stir it up with red meat, and fundraise off of it instead of working to help the Floridians that put them in power to basically support them and be their voice in Tallahassee.
And I used poor phrasing. Obviously, what they talked about and what we're talking about has tremendous impact. But Brian, to your point, above and beyond the impact there, you did not see things that you thought move the ball substantively for Floridians everywhere in terms of things 20, 30 years outbound.
Look, when you have a legislature that wants to take some of its precious time, remember, they're only in session for 60 days. Mm-hmm. When you want to take some of that time to toss out a law passed by the citizens of Key West limiting the size of cruise ships coming into their ports, when you want to pass a law limiting the ability of local governments to control businesses coming out of the home, so you may, and the hours of operation for those businesses, when you want to prevent communities from, suing agriculture because of pesticides or smoke, as we find in the glades, whether the issue is correct or wrong. These are the kinds of petty little things they were doing. And frankly, even worrying about the transgender issue, it's sort of funny to me that they're very, very concerned about transgender girls playing, or transgender girls playing on girls' football teams. But they're apparently not concerned about them playing on boys' teams. So I guess they're just worried about little girls. So, this is small ball pettiness, and I really wish it would stop. But ultimately, I blame the voters. You sent them there, folks.
Less than 30 in this segment. Mary Anna, final thought here.
Yeah, to Brian's point, it's really fascinating to me to listen to Republican men talk about how they're trying to protect girls. And meanwhile, while they're doing that, they're actually only protecting girls. They're not protecting the transgender youth, which, as we heard from our previous guests, have a higher rate of suicide. That's the problem with this. As a limited government party and not wanting the government interfering with everybody's lives, they sure are passing a lot of bills as Republicans that are actually growing the government.
Mary Anna, Brian, back with your closing thoughts in just a moment.